Hello, creativity lovers. Before we go any further with this podcast episode, I just want to flag with you that we had a few technical issues throughout this recording. However, I absolutely loved the conversation and I think there's tons of value in it. So we have decided to go ahead and put this episode out into the wide world. Just flagging that with you, it's not exactly the same audio standard as some of our other episodes. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Creativity Uncovered. My name is Abby Gatling and I am on a journey to uncover how everyday people find inspiration, get inventive, and open their imagination. In this podcast, I'm finding out how people use creativity at home, at work, at play, and everything in between. And my goal through these conversations is that by the end of it, you'll be armed with a whole suite of tried and tested ways to summon creativity the next time that you need it. Today, I am speaking with Tony Zerafa, who is a flash fiction author, a podcaster, and a teacher. And I am super curious to find out how these three things relate and how they came to be. So welcome, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on and looking forward to having a good chat.
Yes. Look, I purposely kept that intro a little short, a flash intro, if you will. I'm taking a leaf out of your book. And so I did mention that amongst other things, you are a flash fiction writer. And that's not really a term that I've come across before. So let's start off. Can you tell me a bit about what is flash fiction and how did you get into it?
Well, I've always loved writing, and ever since I was little, had my head down. I was more comfortable in a book, and I was happy writing things down. As I got a little bit older, and sort of as with the passage of time, the writing sort of tended to drift away a little bit, and you sort of get bogged down in the monotony of life, and you just sort of you lose that sort of creative spark. So I came across flash fiction actually. My wife was having a chat and we were sort of talking, and she is an avid blog reader. So I jumped on a few blogs and did a little bit of reading and discovered that there's a really short form of fiction called flash fiction. So what flash fiction is it's a story in less than 1,000 words. And what appealed to me about flash fiction is that you have to be really concise with your characterization, with your language choice, with your plot. But what I really did like is that it can actually be resolved in a short amount of time. So obviously, being a teacher, I'm always looking at ways to engage kids with reading and writing. Kids these days, in terms of their attention and what they can focus on, a lot of them don't tend to read novels, but they'll read shorter forms of writing. So I thought, well, what if I wrote some things that could be read in 5 or 6 minutes, but could be all sort of a complete package and tell a story? So I did a little bit of research. I did a little bit of reading, and then I took the plunge in November last year and started doing some writing and committed to writing a piece every day for 365 days. So I'm about 220 odd days into the journey.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, and then I got onto writing a blog. So I wrote for a little while and I thought I'd sort of keep it to myself, and was really reluctant to sort of put writing out there because in the minute you put your writing out there, the minute you put yourself out there, you open yourself to critique. So again, I'll thank my wife for the inspiration. She said, well, you've read blogs, why don't you start one? So I did. And I sort of started it in about January this year, and I've been sort of writing fortnightly ever since. So I've got about 52, 53 stories over on the blog. And yeah, I've sort of honed my craft. My first few pieces were a little bit rough and ready, but they've sort of improved. Like with anything that you do, Abby, as you can probably appreciate, the more you do it, it's like exercise, the better you get at it. And hopefully the writing is improving.
Yes, totally agree. I mean, you make it sound so easy, like, oh, I thought of that and then I just did it. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's very courageous to actually even start that. Because so you said you're an English teacher, is that right?
Yes, so I've been an English teacher for 20 years. So I teach sort of year 7 through to year 12. And the students are also an inspiration too, because part of my motivation for writing, or part of my inspiration, was that I ask students to write creatively all of the time. And I'm very big on modeling what I'm practicing, what I preach. So if I'm expecting junior students and senior students to write creatively, then I need to know how to be able to do it myself and sort of have some strategies or some tools that sort of allow students to develop their skills, and then as an adult, sort of putting those things into practice.
Yeah, wow. So how has starting writing, how has that impacted your teaching then?
It's really methodical. So when you sort of go about writing, you have to have that creative spark. So when you talk about creativity, there has to be something there that ignites an idea. So whether it's a little, and it can be something really incidental. So I went back to the process. So I teach sort of in school, and when you teach kids how to write, it's very process driven. You teach them how to generate ideas in a structured way. You teach them how to plan in a structured way. You teach them how to write in a structured way. And for education purposes, that's okay. But real creativity sort of just resonates from anything. So I started practicing different ways that I write, and some of the ways that I've been teaching, and I sort of, on reflection, hadn't been really effective, because I've tried to sort of use the strategies I taught, and some of them didn't work. Because writing, as you know, or creativity, is not always structured. Sometimes it just generates by osmosis. It just happens. So
Yeah.
it sort of caused me to reflect on the way that I teach kids on how to harness their creativity. So I've had to go back sort of to the drawing board a little while, and I've even actually shared my work with some of the kids too, and they've given me some constructive feedback at times. But it's actually really opened up a dialogue for creativity, and creativity is really hard for especially young people who live um, in a really different world than sort of people who are a little bit older live in. So yeah, I've had to really go back and reflect on the practices and really try and hone my own writing craft so I can get better at teaching it.
That's amazing. It seems like a two-way street. You're writing more to improve your teaching, and your teaching's probably improving your writing as well.
It is. It is. And I'm consciously reading more. I'm consciously aware of different language types. And with flash fiction, you do have to do that, because we read novels that are 300 pages long, but in flash fiction, you've got 4 pages, and you've got to resolve a character, you've got to resolve a plot, you've got to every line has to be doing some heavy lifting. So, and that's really part of what we teach as well with kids, is that you haven't got a lot of time. You need to sort of get and make sure that every word and every phrase is working for you.
Wow, getting the most out of every single word. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, just a little bit. But you've got to have fun too. Like, and the good thing with creativity is that you're not always going to get it right. Like, it's not, and what people's idea of what right is really subjective. And being creative is really different for different people.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. It's what is right. It's just someone's opinion.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, you were saying that you were sort of an avid writer as a kid, and it sort of dropped off along the way. Did you think that going into becoming an English teacher was going to give you that opportunity to get back into writing or to be creative, or did you seeking out that writing opportunity outside of work? Was that sort of you trying to inject more creativity back into your life?
A little bit of both. So I've always been a reader, and I always, it sounds really corny, but I take great joy out of seeing children achieving things, especially when they've got sort of that nucleus of an idea. So in English, we teach a lot of different forms. We teach formal writing, we teach different types of reading, but writing's been my passion. It always has been. So I've always loved to write. Um, I found sort of a couple of years ago, I was feeling a bit bland, a bit flat with what I was doing. And I was teaching all of these things, um, and I sort of hadn't picked up a pen and write creatively for a really long time. And I felt like I needed to sort of have that outlet to sort of explore different ideas and different thinking. So life experience too. So initially when I started writing, it was based on a lot of my lived experience. So I grew up in a single parent family. My dad brought us up on his own, so for a very long time. And I was surrounded by creative people. So both my sisters are quite creative. So one sister is a ceramic artist, and another sister is always looking at doing, so she does paper tile, and she does painting, and she does drawing, and mum did a lot of art and things like that. So I'd sort of put that part of myself to bed for a long time, and it's sort of a year or two ago, I thought, I need to awaken that a bit. So, because it's been sitting there and lying there really dormant, and I just need to find that again and get a bit of spark and enjoy what I'm doing again. Because you sort of fall into a bit of a trap, and you just sort of go through the motions. So, writing has really sort of freed the shackles. So I've been exploring things and sort of tapping into experiences that I thought were away for a really long time. It's been fantastic this year. It's been a wonderful journey so far.
Has it been quite a cathartic experience for you?
Yes, actually, yeah, it has been quite a cathartic experience. So, um, there's a couple of pieces that I've written over on my blog that were sort of delving into memories and thoughts of when I was a young boy, and sort of recounting what I thought were actually just dreams or just vague recollections, but actually turned out to be things that I remembered from when I was 4 or 5 about various events that have occurred in my life. Um, and it is quite cathartic, and some of those pieces that I've written early on really hurt to write. It's sort of delving into parts of yourself and exploring parts of yourself that you sort of keep bottled away for your own sort of emotional protection, because you don't want to have to relive that all the time. But I suppose through writing, you have to allow yourself to explore those parts and go into the depths of sort of your soul and your psyche that you probably wouldn't normally go. And I suppose part of starting to write is sort of me, it is quite cathartic, and actually revisiting those experiences and almost giving yourself permission to grieve and to question and to ask questions. And it's brought sort of the family together too, because I'm very cautious early on. So some of the pieces were quite personal. So it's really asking permission from people as well to tell that story. And that's opened up a whole lot of conversations that we hadn't had for a really long time.
Oh, yeah. I often wonder about that when people draw on their own personal experiences and translate it into art, whether it be a story like yours or a painting or a song. How do you navigate that? Because it's your personal lived experiences, but it's also kind of showing the vulnerability of others as well.
Yeah, and you do have to open yourself up to being vulnerable, and it's sort of you reach sort of a point in your life where, not that you stop caring what people think, but you do need to be able to find a way to express that, so you can sort of move on and not hold on to this grief or sadness or anger or even joy. Like, it's not, the writing's not all doom and gloom. Like, there's some really beautiful things that I remember, and beautiful memories, and sort of the early pieces sort of reflect on that. But you do have to, in life, allow yourself to be a little bit vulnerable, and that's, for a lot of people, that's actually really a hard thing to do, like to sort of take the sort of the walls down and actually let people have a glimpse. It is a really difficult thing to do.
Definitely. It's kind of bearing a little part of your soul to someone else, and by putting it out there, you're, I guess, opening it up for critique and criticism and commentary. How do you deal with that when it's such a when you're writing about personal topics?
It's actually quite affirming in a lot of ways. To be truthful, I haven't had sort of a lot of negative feedback or comments. So I publish primarily on a blog, and I'm looking sort of in the next year or two to sort of put that into a book or a novella. So that's sort of a work that's sort of sitting there in the background. Um, I suppose for me, it's actually brought sort of family together, and it's actually given a voice to things that we sort of as a family sometimes we haven't really spoken about for a long time. So I know there was one particular piece that comes to mind. It was called Memories, Myths and Magic, and it was me recalling some experiences that I had with my sister who lives in Scotland, and we hadn't seen each other for a very long time, but it was um, me recalling that memory, and we had a really long phone call prior to me publishing it, and then she opened it up and she just wept. She was just reading it and she was
Oh,
just crying. She said, how do you remember all of this? How did this come to you? How can you recall all of this? I said, things like that never go away. Sort of your memories, you might bottle them up and keep them away, but they never really leave you. And I've started publishing poetry, and I've had some of the most heartfelt comments from people as well. Sort of when your writing resonates with people, sort of it makes you feel good because your story is also telling a little bit of their story, and people sort of form that connection. So I haven't really had sort of negative kind of feedback. It's all been quite affirming, but I suppose you take the good with the bad when you do anything creative, and when you go down that pursuit, you have to be resilient and sort of take that feedback when it comes.
I kind of love that people can relate to other people's creativity like that. As you said, all different people are reading it and resonating with it on a number of different levels. Like creativity is such a great connector in that way, isn't it?
It is, and there's so many different forms of creativity. So when you sort of start writing or you start exploring your own creativity, you actually look at the world around you, and think there are a whole lot of people who are expressing their creativity in a whole variety of ways that you're just oblivious to. So I love music, and I'm a huge music fan. I've got it on 24/7, 365, and I hadn't sometimes sort of sat and listened to a lot of the lyrics, but if you listen to a lot, music is just one of the ultimate expressions of creativity. And then you start to look at art in a different way, and the way people express themselves through their art, and through their dance and through their performance. And there's just so many creative ways that people can express their thoughts and ideas. But we take it a little bit for granted sometimes, that we sort of just go through the world and there's people who are putting their heart and soul into their creative endeavors. That they might sort of have that sense of self-doubt and wondering if it's actually resonating with anybody. But to have that connection with an artist, and sort of through that artistic form is fantastic.
Mm. Do you think that all creativity needs to have that sort of feedback loop sort of built in like that? Or is it possible and is it relevant to put it out there without anyone making comment on it?
Yes, it is. And I think creativity is as I mentioned before, Abby, it's a really subjective process. So a lot of people engage in creative pursuits for really individual reasons. So some people, through their art, engage in creativity because it is a form of catharsis. They do need to sort of cleanse their own thoughts and experiences through their creative form. And I suppose you go through that element of doubt when you do sort of engage in a creative pursuit, because you think, well, what if nobody reads it? But it takes a long time, or looks at it, or engages with it. But the art is for the people around you, but the art is for the artist. I think for the artist, and a way to find their way of creatively expressing themselves in whatever form that they choose. So the feedback and the affirmation is nice, but I don't think it's necessary for creativity. I think people can be creative without sort of having that sort of pat on the back affirmation all the time, because it is a really subjective thing.
Do you think would you have the same level of fulfillment with your writing if you got it to the point of being finished but never releasing it? Or do you think that's an important part for you as well?
I haven't released anything yet, because I don't want to be doing that till it's quite ready.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose that for me, and I've always, as part, again, sort of coming back to teaching, which I've been doing for a long time, I talk about the journey rather than the destination. And again, it sounds really cliched, but I'm very much sort of that belief, is that journey has just as much value as that end product. So, if you sort of have those experiences along the way that have shaped you as a person, and you've found a way that you can express yourself and your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions around that, and that for you as an individual has been a positive experience, then that's where the value is. It's sort of no point becoming despondent because nobody's reading your book, or nobody's giving you a like on Instagram, or nobody's reading your blog. You have to sort of move past that and sort of go back to the core purpose of what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it for. But that has to be sort of coming from a place, you have to be in a good place emotionally yourself to realise that.
Yes, I agree. And I agree that it's a journey, not a destination. And if you have a wonderful piece at the end of it that you're happy to share within the world, that's fantastic. But I think that's a bonus, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's jump back and talk about your writing a bit more, because I know you've said that you have written about some kind of personal topics and reflecting on your childhood. But you don't always write serious things. I've listened to a couple of your podcast episodes, and some of it's quite mythical and magical. And so tell me, what do you write about, and how do you choose what your next topic is going to be about?
Yeah, look, the thing that sort of motivates me with writing is sort of the characters. So I sort of have characters that live in my head. I've got a lot of voices, not sort of in a bad way, but I've got a lot of things going on in my brain all of the time. And sometimes I tend to write about I write about the fringes, the people on the fringes, and sometimes the things that people think about wanting to do that never sort of get around to doing, or sort of looking at sort of what happens sort of behind the mask or behind closed doors. So quite a few of my stories are sort of in a serial form. So they're called what's called a novella in flash. So they're sort of individual flash fiction stories, but they follow a sequence. So they follow a narrative plot. And sometimes sometimes the plot and the characters drive themselves. So it could be as simple as, or innocuous as looking at a picture. So looking at something that might inspire me. So it might have been a dusty road sort of down in the country. And I think, okay, what could happen at the end of that dusty road? There's a house. Well, what happens in that house? And I start telling a story to people who live in that house. Is it just a regular kind of place? And sort of let stories evolve from there. So it could be an image, it could be a character, it could be a song that I've heard. It just depends on what sort of has the creative spark. So I've tended now to move away from the individual stories because it gets quite taxing having to write I publish 2 pieces a week on a blog, and coming up with different ideas all the time sometimes does get a little bit difficult. So I now started writing sort of those novellas in flash, so those pieces that sort of follow a character or a sequence or a plot to sort of allow me to develop a particular line or a particular character or a particular idea. But I'm very character driven. My characters are the center of my story, and I tend to write a lot of first person. So I like to become one with the characters, and some of them are quite humorous, some of them are quite ghoulish and quite dark. So it just depends on what the mood takes me, I suppose.
So it's just kind of a beautiful exploration of your imagination, and you can be inspired by a range of different things.
It can come along from anything, but sometimes if I've just got a character in my head, I'll build a story around a character. So one of the stories I've written was about a housewife who lived a very suburban, a regular life, and much to her husband had no idea that she was actually a contract killer. So he would be at home, he's living his life, and she would go out and on the guise of having drinks with her friends, and she would go out and do the things that that are quite ghoulish. So I actually like to explore the duality of people as well. So what the mask that they wear, sort of what society sees of them, versus the kinds of things that we sort of keep behind. That's sort of a lot of the ideas sort of behind my writing, is what people see versus the reality of what people are. That sort of tends to be a big motivator with sort of my creative outlets.
That's not a personal story, right? You're not secretly a contract killer.
No, not at all. But my wife does get a little bit of a giggle when I read about those things, and so a lot of it is tongue in cheek. So a lot of it, as I said, is just sort of finding different ways of sort of expressing my thoughts and ideas.
And you sort of mentioned it before, the sort of the struggle of keeping up with demand. You write 2 things a week. You also produce 2 podcasts a week, right? What happens when you come up with like a creative block, or you're just sort of struggling to get started? What's your process for getting into flow?
It's funny you mention it, because I've actually sort of started to sort of hit that sort of creative block of late. So what I've actually done is, rather than looking at the form, sort of the flash fiction form, and doing 2 of those, I've started to explore different creative outlets. So I've started to sort of delve into poetry. So I'm writing short of free verse kind of poems, lyrical prose, haikus. So sort of still expressing my creativity, but not in a way that's sort of as sort of taxing or as time consuming as what it is to develop a full kind of narrative. So sometimes with a creative block, you have to look at other ways that you can express your creativity. And sometimes it's as simple as walking away and giving it a little bit of a break. So it's not sustainable to sort of just look at it as work that needs to be churned out. So I'm sort of at that point now, sort of in the next little while, where I may be pulling back to maybe doing a podcast once a week and maybe blogging once a week, because I feel like I need to have that little bit of a slow down time, just to let my mind sort of rest and sort of get reinvigorated. So the creative block is sort of the struggle is real. But sometimes you do just need to step away from your outlet and look at other ways that you can express yourself. So if you do have a block, it's finding another way that you can do that. So whether it's through different forms of writing, or if you're a painter, you might not paint for a little while, or you might immerse yourself in something different, just to find a different way of expressing yourself creatively. So you do have to be kind to yourself, and you do have to give yourself some time away from your form to sometimes find that spark again.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. It's the first step, I think, is a creative block. And then if you keep pursuing that without changing anything, that's when you can get to creative burnout, which is way harder to come back from.
Yes. Yeah, and you've really got to be conscious of that. So art and creativity is not something that you should just be doing just to churn out product. It is, as I've mentioned before, it's a form of expression. So if you need to take that break, then you sort of, you might do something completely different and completely change it up. But I suppose in a workplace and where you have to be creative all the time, that would be really, really difficult. So I empathise with a lot of people who have to do that sort of in whatever profession, where they've got to be creative all the time. So can I ask you a question, Abby, if that's okay?
Of course, yeah.
Sort of when you're doing your job in marketing and sort of liaising with people, what are the strategies that you use sort of to overcome your creative blocks?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I don't normally have have it turned on me like this, but yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, it is true. It's as a marketing agency, and people come to us for branding and new ideas to get their business out of there, they kind of just expect that you are this unlimited tap, like creativity on demand. And that's a huge amount of pressure. And sometimes it just doesn't happen. You might be tired. You might have 1,000 other things on your to-do list. You maybe just don't click with what the vision of, whatever the brief is. And there's a couple of ways that I get around it. One of them is this podcast, because I realize that when the time that I feel most creative is when I'm talking about creativity with other people. I can't help but have a smile on my face when I'm hearing you talk about your creativity. So that was one of the things that last year I came across, is that I'm, as we get busier and busier and more clients, that creative block can reappear more and more regularly. So I needed to do something about it. So it was kind of just my reflection of, okay, how do I find my spark? Let's think about it. There's a bunch of different ways, playing around with ideas, sketching things out, going for a walk. But the most consistent thing that comes back to me is having these conversations. So that's my process for for challenging that in myself.
Sorry for turning the questions on you. I should be answering the questions, shouldn't I?
No,
So,
I love.
It's a teacher habit coming out, and you're just asking questions. So,
tell me more. No, I think it's good. I think part of the whole thing with this podcast is finding out how people tackle these issues that come up, which are common across all creatives, and hearing how different people approach it. So, it's fantastic to hear your way, and I'm happy to share my way as well. So thanks for asking me the question.
no, that's just fine. And it's a really difficult thing. Like it's something that we ask people to be creative all the time in our various fields. And I know with teaching, I'm asking kids to be creative all the time. But what I really enjoy in actually talking about creativity is that you have to have those tools in your kit to sort of, when you do have those creative blocks, how do you overcome that? And when you're teaching people and other people are expecting you to be creative, how you actually overcome those blocks. So it's a really challenging thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. And what you said before about being kind to yourself is so important, because if you come across a creative block and you start getting stressed and you let your pressure levels rise, especially, if you've got a deadline or something like that, you're never going to achieve it. It's being kind to yourself, giving yourself the time to have that break, do whatever else you need to do to work through it and come back to it, and not let it shake your confidence, because confidence is key with all of this.
It is, and getting that feedback and that affirmation is, look, I know I mentioned before, it can be a bit of a selfless exercise, but we also need a little bit of affirmation to give us that inspiration to drive us forward. And I know, reflecting back on teaching and asking kids to be creative, that one comment that you give to a child or a student that says, I really like what you've written here. I love this turn of phrase. I love this word. I really like this character. I love this plot. Have you thought about doing this? And they go, oh, you see them sitting up a little bit straighter. So the affirmation is really important. So I suppose that's part of the writing is and teaching writing and becoming a writer, myself, is being conscious of that too. In when you teach kids, we all need that affirmation. We all need to say, hey, I really like that. And if it's resonated with people, that's actually a really affirming thing to have as well.
Yes, definitely. I think people realize the impact that thoughtful feedback can have on people. Just even if it's just something small, like just a one line, the fact that you have taken the time to listen, think about it, and then provide that feedback in a constructive way can have such a great impact on the other person.
Absolutely, positive feedback is the key, and for some people, it's just, you might have viewed their art or viewed their creative endeavours, but it's about being noticed, and it's about being recognised and acknowledged, because to put something there to be read or to be viewed, or a podcast, when you're creating a podcast, to be listened to, you are allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and it is nice to get that affirmation, and it's what creative people need, because if you do make that connection and you notice that people are reading or listening or viewing or taking in what you're doing, it does give you that spark to go forward and to continue with your creativity. But Yeah, positive feedback is a real key, and it's something that I suppose is really undervalued. And what I don't like with a lot of things that go on sort of in media and social media is that people are quick to nitpick and criticise, but people put their heart and soul into a lot of things that they create, and that one negative comment can send that person sort of down into that spiral. Why would you need to be negative for? Why do you need to sort of fill up the space with negative vibes or negative comments? Affirm people, build them up, make them feel good. It's not hard.
Yeah, and I it's a warning to everyone out there. I don't think social media is a place to get that positive feedback, because
Absolutely not.
Even just my own experience, like I know that people are way more likely to say something negative or do an angry face or something like that on social. They're more likely to do that than do the like face, love, the comment. But then, I run into people on the street and they're like, hey, I listened to this, that was really good, or whatever. And I'm like, well, why didn't you do that online?
Yeah.
Why did you leave it to now? You just let the troll stay online. But anyway, that's just a little warning to everyone. But so we talked a bit about how you work with creative blocks. Can you tell me, when do you feel you're most inspired and you're most in creative?
When I'm actually not when I'm like deeply engaged in sort of correcting and sort of in the monotony of work, and I've got my mind is actually free to wander and sort of be free sort of from the monotony of the everyday. So school holidays are great, weekends are great, but it's actually finding sort of that that time to allow yourself and give your mind permission to wander and be free. We get so caught up in the busyness of our lives that we sort of don't give our minds space to be creative, because for a lot of time it's actually sort of not deemed as worthy. You're always looking at, a lot of people focus on the needing to make money or coping with the next bill or dealing with whatever. We live sort of in a triage kind of life, and we don't sort of give our minds permission to be creative. It's almost not okay. So it's being really conscious of giving your mind the space to breathe and to be free and say, you know what, I'm just going to listen to some music, or I'm just going to go for a walk, I'm just going to be inspired by something around me, and I'm just going to let the mind wander. And it's being really mindful of yourself and mindful of your surroundings, and almost giving yourself that permission to sort of be free. And sometimes when your mind is free, the creativity just flows. So when you're away from work and you're away from the routine and you're away from that monotony of the everyday, your mind sort of relaxes, and then it's almost like opening up different chapters in a book. So it's the chapters you sort of, I hadn't read that part yet, I haven't looked at that for a little while, and then that sort of part opens, and then you sort of delve into something else. So it's being away from work, and in those quiet times too, it's actually sort of building, and a sort of counterintuitive or it goes against what I've said, but you've got to block yourself time to allow to do that too during the week. So you can't just sort of be creative in sort of set periods of time, like 2 weeks out of every 10 I'm going to be creative. That's not how it works. It's giving yourself time during the day to let your mind just be free, and being really mindful, and whether you meditate or whether you listen to music and whether you do something just to be aware of yourself and to be conscious of who you are and where you're at, that's where that creativity comes. So sometimes that's where it comes from me. So during the week at night time, the kids are in their rooms and they're doing their thing, and I'm sitting there sort of just listening to some music and trying to chill out. That's when a lot of the ideas tend to come, and sometimes you just get a run on with an idea and you've just got to pursue it. So it's conscious blocks of time, but also sort of away from that routine and that monotony of the everyday.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying when you say it says it's kind of counterintuitive to have it planned ahead of time, but to take a different view of that, I think it's actually showing to yourself subconsciously that it's important, and it's an important act for you to be creative, because we plan out our lives to the minute. A lot of people, we block out time for work, we block out time for sport and whatever. If you actually go and you block out time for creativity, it is showing that it's an important part of you and it's non-negotiable that you're going to be doing that.
Absolutely, and you do have to prioritize that. So I don't think we give ourselves permission to be in silence. So the silence from the world and being creative, you need to give yourself permission to say, you know what, it's actually okay for me to be creative. It's actually okay to find some time in my day where I can harness that creativity in whatever form that I choose. And it is giving yourself permission to do that.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, Tony, that was just such an interesting conversation. We spoke a little bit about your writing, but I just really loved hearing your views on creativity and where it can take you. So thanks so much for sharing all of that with me today.
Thank you, Abby. I appreciate the opportunity to come on the podcast.
I know. I think that's fantastic that you've given me that time on your school holidays, no less. And I will pop the links to your podcast and to your blog on my website so people can go and have a little sticky beak there. It's well worth a check out. And also thank you to everyone who has actually tuned in today to Creativity Uncovered. I really hope that today's episode has inspired you to put your words into action. Pardon the pun, that one just slipped out. And I really, really hope that what we discussed today helps you summon your creativity the next time that you need it. Thanks, and catch you next time. If you've made it this far, a huge thank you for your support and tuning into today's episode. Creativity Uncovered has been lovingly recorded on the land of the Cubby Cubby people, and we pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. This podcast has been produced by my amazing team here at Crisp Communications, and the music you just heard was composed by James Gatling. If you liked this episode, please do share it around and help us on our mission to unlock more creativity in this world. You can also hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episode releases.